Chasing the Mind podcast number 8.5 bonus. Back to school. Welcome to Chasing the Mind, hosted by Dr. Angela Johnson and Dr. Stephanie Schwartz, the podcast that explores the art and science of the mind. Each episode, we will feature a topic or guest who offers a unique perspective in answering the following questions. How do our thoughts influence our sense of who we are? How do we impact the world around us? And can changing our minds change everything? Today on Chasing the Mind, Dr. Angela and Dr. Stephanie will offer some tips for college students heading back to school.
I'm Dr. Angela. First, I want to thank listeners of Chasing the Mind. Dr. Stephanie and I have been amazed at how our audience has grown over the past few weeks. When we started the show, we both really wanted to create a place where conversations about psychological topics could be shared through the personal stories of our guests. We've also really enjoyed answering questions from our listeners, which reminds me, we have some great shows coming up. On our regular release date this Friday, you'll hear an interview that Dr. Stephanie and I had with author Laura Heffernan. Laura combines a geeky sensibility with romantic comedy. Her second book, Sweet Reality, was released this week, and Dr. Stephanie and I had a great time talking to Laura about reality television, the discipline of writing, and her romance trilogy. It's an interview I know you'll want to hear. And after Laura, Dr. Stephanie and I will be doing another talkback show where we will answer questions from our listeners. If you have a question about a psychological topic, or if you have a personal situation that you'd like us to address, you can email us at info@chasingthemind.com or post your question on Facebook, or you can tweet us at @chasingthemind. Remember that Dr. Stephanie and I are not providing individual therapy, nor are we acting in the role of your therapist. However, we can offer some advice or general guidance based on our experience, education, and training. And just to keep it fun, we thought maybe we could add a segment to the show where we talk about some aspect of psychology as depicted in the media. So listeners, tell us your favorite psychological movie, television show, literary character, whatever strikes your fancy. Again, you can email us, post on Facebook, or tweet your suggestion at #ChasingTheMind, #favorite. Also, before we get to today's bonus episode where Dr. Stephanie and I offer back to school tips for students heading off to college, I want to give a shout out to the Reasonable Risk podcast with Michael Schaefer, where I am a guest on his 9th episode. Michael and I talked about sex offender risk assessments, stranger danger, and why your kids will probably be just fine. It was a great conversation, and I know you'll want to hear it. And the episode is available now on iTunes or at reasonableriskpodcast.com. So now to today's discussion between Dr. Stephanie, who just returned to teaching this week, and myself about what your college professor wishes you knew. I hope you enjoy it. And stay tuned after the episode for some outtakes of our conversation.
So, Dr. Angela, it is that time of year for back to school.
Aren't you excited, Dr. Stephanie? You get to teach all those beautiful, bright young minds of the future.
Yeah, in fact, I had my very first class.
And?
It's always exciting. A new semester is full of promise. Absolutely.
So we should talk about what your professor wishes you knew on your first day of class.
It's so true, because often that first day full of promise and joy, by the middle of the semester, at least for the students, sometimes for me, it turns into less pure joy. And one of the instances already sort of started. I think that in our culture, there's been an informalization. People don't write to each other. They don't write letters as much. They write emails, which is a more informal form of communication. And I think that's led to a bit of non-realization on the part of students about when more formal and less formal communication is called for. For example, I had a student walk into my office and said, I'm looking for Stephanie. And I'm sort of like, you're not looking for Stephanie, you're looking for Dr. Schwartz, or you're looking for Professor Schwartz. And honestly, when students make errors like that, most of the time it's very innocuous.
Well, it's not malicious, but it is, like you said, it's a lack of training. It's a lack of having to interact in a world where there are formal titles, you know? I mean, you're not Stephanie.
I'm really not.
No, you're a professor.
And so I just correct people and move on. Sometimes I've realized this is a gender issue. These things do not happen by informal poll on Facebook. Okay, if we start with informal polls of professors I know, this happens with much less frequency to male professors.
Well, I think that's true. And that's true in just being a doctor. If you have a doctorate in any field, you are more likely to be called doctor if you're male versus if you're female. I mean, I testify in court, and I've had a number of times where lawyers have started with like, Miss Johnson. And I'm doctor. It's Dr. Johnson.
I recall one occasion on which they sort of very patronizingly asked you, well, is it Miss Johnson or Mrs. Johnson?
Right.
And you said, doctor will do just fine.
Right.
Sometimes I will say on the part of freshmen particularly, sometimes it is just carryover from high school where their teachers are not professor or doctor. Their teachers are Mrs. I think also I've learned over the years to point out to students at the beginning of the semester that a certain degree of formality is called for. And I talk to them a little bit about, when I talk to them about writing, it's unfortunate, but because students do less writing nowadays than they used to, there's been this emphasis on testing, and I think it started out with very good reasons. Unfortunately, what we've ended up with is schools that really focus on testing and not on certain skills such as writing.
There isn't enough time to really teach good writing in classes because they are focused on how do we get through the curriculum? How do we teach to the test? How do we get them prepared to sort of pass these hurdles that we've set up for them? And things like writing take a lot more time and skill to teach.
And frankly, by the time they're in college, I'm being hired, in this case, one of the classes I'm teaching is child development. There's a certain amount of knowledge about child development I need to pass on. And I also want to pass on some things about psychology being a science and research methods, and to sort of fit that all in. And in addition, teach them how to write. It's just not feasible.
Right.
You once said to me, I didn't learn writing by being taught writing. I learned writing by reading. And I think we are starting to have a generation that didn't read as much. And the quality of writing that is on the internet, a lot of the internet, and on a lot of social media is nothing near the quality of writing that would be able to get published.
That's true.
And so if you're not reading good writing, you're not learning good writing.
So actually going to writing, one of the other issues that comes up with students, and I think you raised it sort of peripherally, is when you go to college, students, you need to know what a primary source is.
Yeah. And the line between cheating and not cheating, because I think sometimes students don't understand that copying something from the internet is cheating.
Right.
I mean, some of them perhaps do realize they're taking a shortcut. Sometimes they don't realize that it really is plagiarism.
Right.
That was not your idea.
Right.
And you are giving it to me in a paper.
Right. And I think that goes again back to the idea that people are reading articles on the internet, and on the internet, they may be hyperlinked to where that came from. But when you hand it to me in a paper, it's not hyperlinked, and I don't know where you got that from. You have to actually cite it, and you have to cite it properly.
And also, if you are submitting a research paper, I don't care if it's hyperlinked or not. I want you to have read the original material. I don't want you to tell me what the Huffington Post thinks about a research article. I want you to have read the research article and you tell me what it's about and if you understood the methodology and the results.
Right. That goes back to what's a primary source. A primary source is not the New York Times talking about an article that came out in the Journal of Medicine. The primary source is that journal article in the Journal of Medicine. This doesn't seem like you should have to say this, but we do every single semester, don't we?
Not only do we have to say it, but we say it and then it happens anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which also comes to students are so used to like multitasking, multimedia. It's so common right now for students to be doing other things than listening to me while I am lecturing, which is distracting to other students. It's actually very distracting for me, and it's just rude. Literally, I have students in my class with one earbud in their ear, sometimes two earbuds. Like they're clearly like they're listening to music. I don't know what they're listening to. It is not me. And students having all kinds of side conversations. It's gotten to the point where I've over time increased the amount of grade weight for what I call attendance, participation, and courtesy.
The tendency for kids to lose interest very quickly in whatever it is that you're telling them. And maybe it's always been that way. I don't know. I don't know what we used to do before we had cell phones. Do we just stare off into space? I probably doodled a lot. I don't know what I did. Actually, often I just didn't go to class and then I wasn't distracting.
Dr. Angela.
I know.
Actually, okay, listeners, I'm going to be honest. I remember being in class with Dr. Angela. She had this pinball game on her computer. She did. And she would be playing this pinball game.
I used to, no, this is like true confessions now. I used to actually, we had to do these, I had this one class, you had it too. We had to write these reaction papers. And honestly, when you're in graduate school, do you have to do reaction papers? Seriously, either you read the stuff or you don't, whatever. So I would actually sit there with my laptop in class writing my reaction paper. And then when we had the break, I would go print it out and turn it in. So I am not the best example of this, but you are missing something if you're not really paying attention, I suppose.
And you were paying attention in class because you were writing your paper based on the discussion in class.
No, I wasn't. No,
you weren't?
No, it was what we had read.
Oh, so, you had read it?
Yeah, no. So I would read it and then I would like come into class and I would just write about it. You know, and she'd be talking about something else. But that was one of those classes that I just felt like,
It's actually funny that you say that about reaction papers because in my freshman course, it's actually not a freshman course. It's called Core, and it's a class for mostly freshmen and sophomores. I make them do a ton of reaction papers. And the reason is that on the internet, everybody's opinion looks like it's equal. So two people can write an article about climate change, and one's a scientist who's been in the field for years, and another one is some idiot who knows nothing about science, and people often weight the two sources equally. Or, when we're talking about medical issues, I mean, we all know a famous celebrity who was telling people to put eggs made out of jade up their personal areas. And, there are people that are taking that just as seriously as recommendations from the Journal of the American Medical Association. So I make them do these reaction papers, and they're sort of very simplistic in a way, and they're very short. And they are a description of something such as a class exercise. I tell them the first half of the paper, the first several paragraphs, are literally what happened. What did you do? And the second half is your opinion. And, I say kind of jokingly, not just I liked it, I didn't like it, but I want to know why. I don't want, 5 out of 5, would do this exercise again. I want to know, was it thought-provoking? Did you not like it because it was disturbing? Was it provocative? Was it upsetting? Did you disagree with the premise? Whether you liked it or didn't like it, you certainly are free to put that, but I want to know your reasoning. I'm trying to teach them to separate fact from opinion, because we've gotten to a point in this culture where the students come in literally not understanding the difference, and they think their opinion on any kind of issue makes something fact.
That one of the things that burdens students coming into college is often beyond their control, and that is their parents.
There's some interesting research out there where there has really been an explosion of depression and in particular anxiety disorders that has been linked to parents overparenting and over-controlling children's experiences. And the problem is, children are not allowed to fail anymore. Oh, they're doing badly on their science project? I'll do it for you. Oh, your teacher gave you a bad grade? I'm going to go yell at the teacher. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to the point where children the freedom to fail is very powerful.
Oh, there's been a ton written about this, how kids come into college just very ill-prepared to deal with failure, to deal with negative feelings, to deal with all of the bumps and scrapes of coming into adulthood that really is the biggest part of college in some ways. I mean, if you go to school and you get a degree in almost anything, in liberal arts or even in business or anything like that, you don't necessarily come out with, a toolbox of skills per se. What you come out with is hopefully the ability to take in information, to apply it, to think critically, to continue to learn and expand, and to cope with some of the conflicts and crises that come up with being an adult. And it's unfortunate if your first foray into this is college, but for some it is. It's the first time they're ever on their own. And they're ever free to think what they want to think or explore what they want to explore. It's really unfortunate because by that point, they're kind of having to make up a lot of ground in a really short amount of time. And it prolongs, there's a lot of research about prolonged adolescence.
Right. And certainly their frontal lobes haven't, finished developing until early adulthood. But the ability to cope with these sort of bumps and scrapes along the way, and even in college, there are all kinds of stories and experiences that professors have all had in terms of parents trying to intervene. Little schnookums couldn't possibly have gotten a C.
Right.
Or I've had students do some really profoundly mediocre work, and the students said, I don't understand. I gave this presentation to my mom, and she thought it was great. And no sense that perhaps mom might be biased. I didn't ask, but I'm like, does mom teach psychology at the university level? I mean,
yeah, I know.
Doubtful.
I know. Well, you start getting used to saying that your kid's finger painting and macaroni jewelry is fabulous. And I think you just forget along the way that at some point you're supposed to stop. You're supposed to stop praising your child for every single thing that they do just because they did it. And at some point you're actually supposed to apply evaluation to it because... Well, one, kids often know when they're not really competent at something and someone's just blowing sunshine, Yeah. Or they don't. And then when the world tells them that all of a sudden that fabulous thing that they're doing that everyone said was so fabulous isn't so fabulous.
And I think it's okay for parents to be supportive of kids. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with a parent saying, oh, you did this presentation, I think that looks great. But the sort of sense that there's a connection between that and what grade you're going to get, or that a parent is the same as the outside world, and that the parent's going to intervene if you don't get a great grade or something like that.
Yeah, in some ways, it's actually too bad because as someone who's worked with parents, one of the things you really want to convince them of really early is that you are working way too hard. And one of the ways you can work less hard as a parent is by letting the kid suffer the natural consequences for their choices. See, you don't have to come up with all the great punishments in the world and all the great lessons, and you don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to be the smartest parent ever. What you can kind of do is guide them, encourage them, direct them. But then when they make certain choices that the world calls them on, like they didn't do their homework or they didn't study for a test, and wham, there comes that bump with reality, you just let it happen.
I'm thinking of a young boys' academy in New York City that had signs up on the doors for parents, and it says, stop. If you're student, and this wasn't for, kindergartners certainly or anything like that. It was for older boys, I believe. But it said, stop, parents. Do not enter. If your student forgot their lunch, forgot their work, forgot their gym shoes, etc., turn around. It is not your job to remember that. For older kids, they're going to have to suffer the consequences and deal with the problem of having forgotten their gym shoes or their lunch. And luckily, if you let them solve those problems are not profound and long-lasting in their consequences. Usually kids are able to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Well, not peanut butter. No.
Well,
they're able to get a sandwich or something from school. And even if they don't, they're not going to starve to death.
And read your syllabus.
I have, in the past 2 years, instituted a syllabus quiz. Literally. And it's 4 extra credits for 10 points of extra credit, whatever. And the first day of class, I go over the syllabus in excruciating detail. And I tell them I'm doing it because I know that in a week I'm going to be getting emails about questions that could be easily answered by looking at syllabus, which they have. I give them a paper copy of and is posted electronically. The syllabus quiz is open note, so they can have the syllabus in front of them. And it has questions like, can I make up a quiz if I have a cold? No. If you can make up the quiz if you have a serious documented illness with a doctor's note. Not if you have a cold. And what's interesting, it's really fascinating because it's open note. I have gone over it in excruciating detail. I mean, it takes me an hour to go through the syllabus. And I looked back at the end of the year, and not everybody got 100% on that 10-point syllabus quiz. First of all, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's a reading comprehension problem. There are some kids that, and I don't mean dyslexia, I mean, whatever it is, whether they are really unable to gather information by reading or they just don't care. I don't know. It's hard to know. But there was actually a significant, I'll say, correlation or link between people who did not get 100% on the syllabus quiz, because it was very easy to get 100%, and people that got lower than a C.
So, but I think that goes to like kids who just aren't prepared for college.
Yeah.
Like they're there and, maybe they're even trying and whatever, but they're just not, they don't have the skill set.
Right.
And this is,
and some of them aren't trying, let's be honest.
Some of them aren't trying, but some of them just really come into school very ill prepared to do the work. And, that's a whole argument for a gap year, and that kids should maybe go out and get a job for a year before they go to college, because it would teach them a lot about accountability. So other student pet peeves. Here's one. Don't email me after you didn't come to class and ask me if you missed anything.
You missed class.
Right.
Obviously.
Right. Is there anything I should know? You should know all the stuff that I talked about for an hour and a half or 2 hours when you weren't there. That's all the stuff you should know. So, and I'm not going to tell you about it because you weren't there.
I'm not teaching the class twice.
I would also say, if you want your professor to really like you, I mean, really, really like you, remember you, think of you fondly when they're reading your research paper. Talk in class, not to the person next to you, but like to the professor. When they ask questions like, what do people think about this? That's a good opportunity to raise your hand and get some nice, warm fuzzies from the professor because you actually paid attention enough to raise your hand and say something.
I even tell them on the first day, look, I'm really gentle and I often just want to generate class participation. And so I will ask really softball kind of questions. I mean, I've tried a lot of different things to get class participation. I think my second year teaching, I thought that operant conditioning was the way to go, and I literally bought some mini candies, and every time a student raised their hand to answer a question, I threw a candy near them. Like, good job, you raised your hand, candy!
Oh my God.
I thought the reinforcement thing would work, but a lot of them don't eat candy. I'm going to be honest here, my aim isn't so good, so some of them I kind of threw candy at them. And so, I didn't injure anyone. I just want to be clear about that. No injuries in the throwing of candy at students, but it didn't work. It just didn't. So now I'm just really, really gentle. Oh, you got that completely wrong. Okay, but you still tried. Also, anytime a student moves at all, really, I'll be like, is that a question? In this happy, excited voice. And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, just a hair adjustment. Well, okay. Moving on. Dr. Angela, I wish to goodness this was video, not audio, because Dr. Angela is like, what kind of freaky, weird professor are you?
Oh my God, that's hysterical.
There are also some gems. I have students that come to my office hours and I tell them, if you are interested in the field of psychology, if you are interested in other fields, if you're interested in, all manner of questions, guidance, things about the course, things about other courses, things about life, whatever, my door is open. This is my office hours. You do not need to make an appointment. And I get some interesting things. I got a student a couple days ago who was telling me that she did some work with rabbit rehabilitation. It was like a shelter, an animal shelter, and I guess they had wild bunnies that had been injured or something. I don't know. It was fascinating. And she was like, oh, you have to be really careful to clip their nails because they bite. They are animals. She was helping rehabilitate the bunnies. And I don't know. You get some interesting kids talking about their experiences and their dreams for the future. And you get some really interesting stuff. So that's kind of what keeps you going.
Thank you for listening to Chasing the Mind. Today's episode featured music from purpleplanet.com. Please send us your questions for our upcoming talkback episode at info@chasingthemind.com. And don't forget to email or tweet us your favorite psychological character from a movie, television, or literary work.
They say opinions are like...
Something from the dollar store?
No.
I apparently don't know this quote.
Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one.
Oh.
Yeah. So bleep. Did we cover everything about this too?
I don't think we did.
Because you went off on all these little details about stuff, and I wasn't sure if we wanted to just do broad snippets or do we want more either ors?
What do you mean?
I don't know, quick things read your syllabus, come to class, don't email me. I don't want to know if you're sick. Just
actually, that's a difference of we have a difference of opinion on that. Did anyone put the chickens away?
I did.
Thank you.
Are we recording?
Yes.
You are?
Mm-hmm.
Are you leaving?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Have you given up on us?